Hi beautiful souls, welcome to my channel. This is Sadhana and today is a long anticipated video for me at least. I have been wanting to pull all of my plant decks out and do a little bit of work as far as looking at the common energy between the decks. So for example, you can see in front of the Soulflower, my Soulflower here, there is a dandelion. So my personal question was, if there is dandelion in any of these other decks, does it have the same energy? Is it going to give a similar reading? Or is this just personal for each of the deck creators? And so I've spent quite a bit of time. I've created a spreadsheet and I've gone through every single card of all of these decks, and I've pulled together a collection of cards that I'm going to share with you. I will do a very, very brief introduction to each of the decks in case you don't know them. And yeah, so this might take more than one video to complete, but I just wanted to share this with you because I've been really trying to spend more time with my plant-based oracles and tarots. So there's two tarot decks here. The rest are oracle decks. And if you're not familiar with them, at the back we have the Druid Plant Oracle, which is the companion deck to the Druid Craft Tarot, and there's also the Druid Animal. So those three decks work really nicely together. Over here is the Spirit of Nature Oracle. Now this is a re-release of a 2003 deck. So the artwork on here will be familiar because it's the same artwork by Will Worthington, who is the artist for these decks. And then in the middle here we have Siola Thompson's Plant Oracle, and this is a brilliant deck. One of my favorites. Siola is the creator of the Line Strider Tarot. And here is the Herbcrafter's Tarot, which is brand new, and by the creators of the Gaian Tarot. So I know this deck is causing quite a bit of talk on the web with the tarot tubers. On the front here is a collection of decks from Nicole, Rallis, from Leila and Olive. And these are very, I'm going to call them poetic plant decks. Very, very different from any of the others here. And then down on the front right, we have Botanical Inspirations, which is definitely a deck for flower lovers. And then behind that, also new to my collection, is my Soulflower. And yeah, so the two tarot decks are the Herbcrafter's Tarot and the Ophidia Rosa Tarot here. Okay, so let's get into the cards. Let's start with the three decks from Leila and Olive. The creator's name is Nicole Rallis. These three decks come in a cardboard two-piece box. This is the tarot, and then we have the two oracle decks. If you are a lover of poetry, a lover of language, these are decks for you. Nicole has written just some really beautiful poetic lines in the guidebooks, especially for the two oracle decks. The tarot deck comes with a very, very thin sheet and has a short description for each of the cards, where the two oracle decks have a more substantial little white book. The Pythia Botanica, you'll see that there's numbers in the corners of the book. These descriptions are not in alphabetical order, so it's a little bit of effort to find the corresponding card in the book. And then the Maiden Oracle is in order. Each of the cards do have a number. So the first 22 cards are our major arcana cards, and then it goes up to, I believe, 60 or 70. And they do not follow the suits of the tarot. It's its own unique intuitive system. So the last card is Lily of the Valley, which is 65, 67. And I did try very, very hard to see if there was any rhyme or reason and if there was some, hidden suits in the Maiden Oracle, but there's not. It just happens to be, have the major arcana at the front and then a lot of oracle cards after that. So three quite different decks. However, the energy is very similar. And I'm going to use that word poetic because I think it really describes these decks well. You'll see the Maiden and the Ophidia Rosa have very similar backs. And then this is the Pythia Botanica, which has the gray back. Yeah, and there is this kind of unique and unusual pairing of some physical objects from the human world, from this three-dimensional world, as well as there are a few animals and other things that appear in the cards. The tarot, just really quickly. So this is what the tarot looks like. It's got a lovely matte gold sides, and all of these cards are the same cardstock, 400 GSM or higher. I would say probably 400 because you can shuffle it. I know when it gets higher, it's very, very hard to reverse shuffle. So you don't get that cardboardy effect, but you still have this lovely, lovely paper quality. And then the Pythia, exactly the same, except the backs are a different color. So same cardstock. And if you just want to see, they all have that tea-stained effect, but slightly different coloration. So this one is definitely a lighter color. And then the Maiden, if you look at the Maiden is more similar to the original tarot deck. I believe that the tarot deck came out first, then this Oracle, and then this unique creation, which, like I said, has the majors and then a whole bunch of other Oracle cards after that as well. So these decks, if you were doing pairings with other decks that kind of had this tea-stained antique look, would work really well. If you're working them with other kind of plant-based or earth-based decks, they definitely would work. Just other things that would work would be, what's it called? Oracle of Oddities. They would look great with a deck like that. But today we're going to actually look at the medicine of the plants. And that is not the strength of this deck. However, it is ever so slightly woven in, and we will include a few of Nicole's cards in that comparison. All right, so let's look at the two decks illustrated by Will Worthington. I know that the Druid Plant Oracle does come in a smaller version. However, if you like this, after we finish doing this video, I would strongly recommend getting the larger book just because there is so much information in the larger book. It is not the same as the little book that comes in the smaller version, as far as I know. So lots of information. You have the name in the Druid name, as well as the Latin name. You have multiple keywords for the upright position and the reversed position. You do have definitely some history and background on the plants, as well as how the plants were used in the past and how they're used presently. And then you have an oracle meaning for upright and a reversed meaning for each card. So this particular card, Matter, is, so we've got these 2 pages here, but some of the plants do have much longer stories. So here's another story. So Matter goes over here, so it's like 3 pages. The Mandrake, for example, 1, 2, 3. No, it's 3 pages as well too. Some of them do have like up to 5 pages, and a lot of historical information and really useful information if you are really diving into the medicine of the plants. That is definitely a feature of this deck as opposed to the 3 previous decks, which is not really about the medicine of the plants at all, or the using the herbs in the kitchen with recipes and so forth. And then this book does have quite an extensive and unique selection of spreads at the back. And I really, really appreciate this book. those of you that have seen my cards before, I did trim this deck. And if you read on the introduction to this book, it does say that in the first border, not the white border, of course, but the next border that around here, there are some oghams included in the border, and that does bring energy to the deck. If you are interested in oghams and you are learning to read them and to kind of understand their frequency, I would strongly recommend not trimming off that border because it has some medicine and some magic to it. A few of the cards in this deck include multiple plants. So for example, the Banes includes 3 of the more I'm going to call them dangerous, toxic plants, and we'll look at this, perhaps we'll look at this card a little bit later. But most of the cards include, there may be other plants in the background, but they focus on one plant. So there are a few cards for one plant, and most of the cards have one plant, and a few of the cards include 3 plants. So that is the Druid Craft plant oracle. And then the other one that's illustrated by Will is this one, Will Worthington, and the Spirit of Nature Oracle. So the same kind of slide out box. I believe it's by the publisher is Eddison. And like I said, this one was published in 2003, and this is a newer version. This deck primarily focuses on trees. However, I have included it in this video because there are quite a few, and there's lots of good information too. So for example, hawthorn is in many of these other plant decks, and the writer, who is John Matthews, does talk about the, I don't think he uses the word fluidity, but what is a tree has, the definition of what exactly is a tree has changed historically. And so some of the plants included in this might not seem to be a tree to us. So for example, heather is also included. This book does focus heavily on the oghams and the language, the energy of the language. There is a message from Green Man, and at the beginning there's quite an extensive discussion about Green Man. What is Green Man, and what exactly is the energy of the trees, and how does that affect the people and the land and all that, all that is around the trees. It's quite different than the Druid one. We have more stories, interesting tales for each of the trees, and less about the plant medicine, so to speak. But I did include it because we do have a crossover with some of the plants that I'm sharing today. This one I trimmed only the white border. There are no oghams, as far as I can tell, in the second border, but I did decide to leave that on. And these cards are quite, you can see this one, so that is ivy, quite dark. But yeah, so this is primarily about the trees, And even if you look at, so here's heather. It's got, a full scene. These are really beautiful paintings. It would be amazing to have. And here's elder. So this is a really, what can I say, old and established elder tree. And in some of the other decks, we're going to look at the elder tree and the elderberry, which looks like a much smaller and younger plant, right? But here we've got a really old and established elder tree, but it's the same genus. And the same plant medicine. And so, yeah, many of these we're not going to talk about because they definitely are trees, but the ones that have the plant medicine and the plant energy, I will include in the video here today. If you want to see a full walkthrough of Siola's deck, I have done a video on that, and it also included it I have several deck comparison videos, and I've used the Hedgewitch Botanical in many of those. It also comes with a fantastic guidebook. This is one of my favorite guidebooks from all of the ones that you will see here. And just like the cards, right, the guidebook has all this wonderful white space, and the sparing use of color is so very, very effective. And there is original art in the guidebook. So let's go back here. So this card here, which is Strength, is Bearberry. So she has the common name, then the Latin name. This would be the picture that's on the card. And then we have all the other more familiar names. And we will, I believe we're going to look at this one today. So this is Uva Ursa, which I know as Kinnikinnick, and it goes by many, many other names. And one of the interesting things is, and through the research that I've done for this video, I've tried to pull all the common names together, because if you didn't know that Bearberry was Uva Ursa, and you, I believe it's in this one, the Maiden Oracle, it's called, or Pythia Botanica perhaps, it's called Uva Ursa. It's not called Bearberry or anything else. So I've done I spent quite a bit of time cross-referencing the cards and the Latin and common names and the varying common names. Siola's put a lot of thought into this guidebook, and she gives a good description about where to find the plants and how to use the plants, as well as an oracle message for each of the plants. And there is connection to the tarot. So many of the cards she has suggested a tarot reference for. So here we have Solal in, we see all kind of 3 stages here, flowering and the berry stage. And at the back of this book, we have a separate, there's a glossary. And this is one of my favorite things. So she's got some nice recipes here. So that's a nice addition to that guidebook. This one is called Botanical Inspirations, and it's a flip open box this way. And quite a substantial little white book. The card backs are really beautiful. It does have the name on the card back. I haven't used the organza bag. It does come with a little organza bag. It comes with a, I believe, 1-word, kind of like a cheat sheet for each of them. So you could have this reference out with you when you're learning about the deck. And then in the little white book, she also has, I believe, no, she doesn't have the Latin name, but she has a common name and some partial Latin names. The symbolism, and then more about each of the flowers. And yeah, so this is if you like flowers, this is a really great deck. It's really pretty, because this is more of a tea stained as opposed to Siola's deck, which is very, very white. For different reasons, you might want to pair this one, with a different deck. And I do a lot of pairing of decks, and I would use this one just because of its colorations. There's a little bit, there's a short message on the cards, which really helps if you're not familiar with the flowers, and then you can, kind of get the general message here, and then if you have time, you can use the guidebook. So there's no human objects in this one, just the flowers and maybe an occasional insect or something like that. I didn't flip through any of the cards from Layla and Olive, but a lot of those have additional objects on them. And yeah, one of the things that's come up for me too in doing this research, so I'm just looking at the Morning Glory here. Where I live, Morning Glory is white. And so there's lots of different genuses of plants, and I'm sure they have different subtle energy, subtle differences in energy. And you're only going to know that by working with the cards yourself, and if you work with the plants. And yeah. So that is Botanical Inspirations. This is Soulflower, mysoulflower.com. This is a very new deck to me and comes in a tuck box. One of the cool things about this is there's several different card backs, and so it looks really pretty when you're shuffling. I believe this one has 44 cards. And on the front of the cards, you have a short oracle message and a keyword. And one of the real nice features is that the border is translucent, so you don't lose the artwork with the border. And it's really beautiful. And this deck has a few flowers I've never, ever heard of before. Here's an example that I really had to kind of do a little bit of research. So the creator of this deck is Lisa Estabrook. And so she has called this one Wood Betony, and in several of the other decks, Betony is included. So I wanted to double check the Latin name and the energy and kind of see if it was similar. And, you know, those are the kind of things that I've been spending time doing. Here we have Daylily and this beautiful dandelion card. Isn't that sweet? Yeah. So, yeah, I've never grown bee balm. It's not something that we have around here, or it's never been a part of my garden. And so it was really nice to kind of learn about a few different flowers through this deck. This was another one, Plumbago. Never grown Plumbago myself or had it in my garden. Some of these decks look really thin because I pulled quite a few of the cards out to when we're going to go through the cards specifically. And then this is the Herbcrafter's Tarot, and there are several complete walkthroughs of this deck you'll see on YouTube, so you can Google that. This is an oversized box. It's not just a... so here are these ones, right? This is just the sides of tarot cards, and this box is a little bit bigger to accommodate the guidebook, I believe. And so the cards sit in this indent. And the card backs are kind of cute. They have all these, you know what this reminds me of? Did you ever play that game when you were a kid where there was a bunch of things on a tray and then somebody took the tray away, took one thing off, and then you had to say what was on the tray? That's what the backs of these cards remind me of. And I can definitely see this deck as one being one to trim. I have not shuffled this. These are still in order. So we've got the Fool as the Dandelion, and the Sunflower as the Magician, and Mugwort. We're going to look at Mugwort for sure in this video. And you can see there's several different objects on each of these cards. So it's not just the Mugwort, and we can't recognize the plant from this video. So you definitely won't be using this deck for plant identification. Yeah, and so lots of different objects, much like the Layla and Olive ones, but this one is more colorful. So we do have a necklace here and some other human objects. And a lot of them have aspects of the kitchen. So here we have cacao, and we have a rattle, and, you know, cup and saucer, and different things here too. Beautiful tablecloth. So this deck, you are getting, I don't know where I was. My camera keeps shutting off, and I don't have a battery light flashing. So I'm just going to repeat what I said, and I'm probably going to have to edit it later. But one of the things I do like about this deck is that we do see arms and hands, but there's no faces. And it kind of gives that energy of working with the land and working with the plants, and that, you know, beautiful sense of cooperation and I don't want to use the word oneness, but it almost looks like there's definitely a sacred relationship between the people that are using the plants and the medicine that the plant is giving in return. Like, this is so beautiful. Really, really beautiful. I just feel like the strength and the peace and the respect and the magic. And definitely you get that sense of witchcraft here. You know, it's really a beautiful deck. Really, really well done. And I know I said about trimming off, I might trim off the borders on this deck, but I feel like there's a lot going on in these photographs, and these white borders might very well contain that space. And so yeah, I might not trim this deck. All right, so let's move that out of the way. All right, so let's look at the cards. What I have done is chosen a few different plants to look at across multiple decks to see if the energy of the plant is similar or not. And what I can tell you from the research that I have done is that the answer is sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So it really, really depends. So here, for example, we have anemone. And in the Botanical Inspirations, the keyword is anticipation. And then in two of Nicole's decks, we have quite a different kind of feeling, which is, so we have the anemone for the Hierophant. So we have, you know, the sense of either teacher or student or learning or mentorship or, you know, moving through a new stage and acquiring some new knowledge. And then in the, so this would be the Maiden Oracle, and this is the Pythia Botanica. So the keyword is sacrifice. And even in her two decks, she's got the same flower with quite a kind of different energy and a different message. So that's what I mean. It depends. And then neither of those messages really kind of duplicates the energy. Perhaps anticipation, we could tie in the keyword with the Hierophant, but not really. The other thing I wanted to say before I go on a little further is that I did not include, so this is the Ophidia Rosa Terra, and I just wanted to make a couple comments about this deck and why I'm not including this deck in the card comparison. For example, so here we have the Six of Swords, which is, the flower is Protea. And because I've been looking at her cards quite a bit, I'm starting to recognize what the plants are through her illustrations on the other two decks. Because on the two Oracle decks, the plants are identified. But in this Tarot deck, the plants are not identified. So you know that little sheet that came with the deck? So here you have no information about what the plant is. The only way to recognize the plant and to get some information, kind of some inside information, is to cross-reference it with her Oracle decks, or unless you know that this is Protea. But for the most part, on the Tarot deck, there are multiple types of flowers, multiple types of plants and objects on each of the cards. So as an example, so here we have the Six of Swords, which is what, it's a time to leave, to move in a new direction, to leave your pain behind, to, you know, muster up some courage and move forward to the next stage of your life. You know, lots of different ways to read the Six of Swords. And the energy of Protea, so just with Nicole's, so this is the Maiden Oracle, and I know Protea was in here. So in the Maiden Oracle, Protea is associated with the Death card. And here we have the Six of Swords. So in a sense, both of these cards have to do with new beginnings, but this is definitely takes a little bit of legwork to do that, especially because the plants are not identified here. Here, for example, is the Four of Cups. So this one's fairly easy to identify as Narcissus, and we have two kind of closed eyes here looking down towards three of the narcissus or the daffodils. And so we can reference this card with other cards that talk about the energy of narcissus, which definitely is one of not looking at your own reflection. And that completely makes sense. But I know in a lot of the decks that we're looking at, narcissus has to do with a sense of brightness and spring and sunshine. And so there's this connection with the old mythology of narcissus and the plant, but also the energy that the flower actually gives you. So it can get really confusing, when we're comparing these decks and looking at if any of the flowers have mythology, how are we going to bring that in? And then, on some of her cards, it's really hard to identify. So this probably is, I'm guessing, is calendula, but because the other two decks don't have much color, it's very, very hard to identify exactly what they are. You really need to look carefully at the leaves. And here we do not have any calendula leaves. And like I said, we have also two other flowers that are involved in this message of Six of Cups. So I would really love to get inside the creator's head and to kind of know what each and every plant was on these cards. And I know other people have commented about that with this deck. So that's why I decided not to include the Ophidia Rosa in this little walkthrough of cards. So here's another example. Here we have Aster, Aster Illumination, Aster the Fool, and Aster Elegance and Patience. So quite different keywords, different energies seen by different creators. And then we go to something like Blackberry, also known as Bramble. And here we have the two more, I'm going to call them historical decks, called Blackberry on this one. And then we also have the Druid name or the Celtic name. And on this card, it's called Bramble. And then here we have, on Siola's deck, we have Blackberry. She calls this adaptation. Just pausing here to open my spreadsheet. Instead of flipping all these different guidebooks open, easier to look at the Excel spreadsheet. Similar messages for all of these decks, and it really has to do with the tenacity of this plant. If you have blackberry in your property, you know that it's very hard to get rid of. It grows anywhere. So love Siola's word adaptation. That works really well. This is a very, very strong and hardy yet sweet fruit. And we're reminded of that paradox in the Devil card in the Herbcrafters. So yeah, we've got the sweetness of the pie, yet we have this very, as a plant, very, what's the word? Persistent. That's not exactly the word I was looking for. In all of the guidebooks, we are reminded of the story of Sleeping Beauty, and there were other fairy tales, I believe, where the prince had to get through the briar patch towards the princess. Herbcrafters reminds us that blackberry can be a safe but destructive hedge. Consider what desires you are indulging. Are they keeping you from seeing the light? Be your own prince and cut them away. Wake up and choose transformation. Yeah. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this already. One of the things I do, really happy with the Herbcrafters Tarot, is that the photorealism is just the right amount of photorealism. It's one thing about the Gaian Tarot that I don't like is that some of the images are just too photographic. So here we have another example where the energy across the decks is very, very similar. We have borage, and I think this is really sweet. So courage, burge. I don't know if you can play with the words, but for me, I pick up on those things, and I like that a lot. So yeah, there's a sense of courage with this plant, and you get that regardless of the deck. And for me, when 4 decks really kind of speak the same kind of language, that tells me that yes, indeed, that is a characteristic of that plant, both as its medicine and as its general energy. So yeah, this one also is included in the Herbcrafters. And one of my criteria for pulling cards for this video was that it had to be included in at least 3 decks. And here we have this plant included across 4 different decks. And this one is on the 6 of water. And 6 of water is not necessarily a keyword that I would identify with this sense of optimism and courage. So let's just have a really quick look at Herbcrafters, which has not made its way into my spreadsheet yet. And no, this does not match the energy of the other decks. I'll just read you one line here. Borage is a continuously flowering plant that encourages a long-lasting relationship with our pollinating friends, teaching us to give freely without expecting anything in return. Drinks made with borage flowers lighten the mood and inspire a courageous heart. Well, there you go. We've got the word courage. So perhaps, yes, that is the, the most important word that we can remember with that plant. And then I chose to pull out calendula because it does appear in a lot of the decks. And here we have this flower. So it's important that when you're looking at calendula that you are distinguishing between calendula and marigold. They are from the same plant family. And I think generally the energy is pretty similar, but as far as making recipes, doing different things, calendula, and not all marigold is edible. I guess that's the most important thing. And it is included also in the Herbcrafters Tarot. So let's just kind of have a look at the keywords here. Here we have communication and brighten, and we're looking here at the 3 of fire, which is definitely, a sense of moving forward and clarity of vision. And then on the Maiden Oracle, this is moonlit blooms and sunlit roots. So I think what this one is speaking to is the use of the whole plant, among other things. On this deck, a lot of the plants are underneath glass, which has with its own metaphor within it. And I find this deck really, it's not difficult to work with, but I feel like I could spend a whole year with Nicole's 3 decks in order to give them, all of the, it's going to take a lot of time to get to know all 3 of these decks. And even though I've used them a little bit, that's definitely not enough. So it's slightly different messages across these 4 decks with the calendula. All right, let's move on to chamomile. And you would assume chamomile tea being a very common kind of tea, that the energy of chamomile would be one of calmness, right? To calm the nervous system. So we have soothe, stability. The key word in the Druid plant is rest, guardianship, and regeneration. So we do kind of have a similar energy with this plant, and we have, one of the nice things here is we all have the same kind of same genus, if that's the right word, of chamomile. And then on the Herbcrafters, it is in the Haya of water. So there is there's a child here. This is the Princess of Water, and she is creating her own medicine with the chamomile flower and water. There's a real sense of peace and serenity through all 4 of these decks. When we go to clover, I think most of these decks have the red flower. They all do, yeah, or the purple flower. So we have nurture and tranquility. So again, similar energy, and really, I love these cards, super pretty cards. Clover's also included in the Herbcrafters Tarot, and that is the 10 of water. So, one of the things I like about these decks is that it really is a beautiful teaching that all of these flowers in plants that we often consider as weeds have this really powerful medicine, and we need to take a new look and you know, a new attitude, a new way of life about all of this medicine and beautiful energy that surrounds us, you know, especially in the spring and summer months. We briefly looked at Narcissus because I showed you the card on the Maiden Oracle or the Pythia already. But here we have Daffodil. And so even on my Soulflower, she's definitely referencing the tale of Narcissus, so the Greek mythology. So we have perception here, and here we have look away. And this is what I was talking about earlier. So Daffodil, we have rebirth, new, and beginnings on Botanical Inspirations. So, you know, it can really vary, totally up to the creator, which way the message is going to go for any of the plants. I may have pulled too many cards for this video, but let's do a couple more. I'm going to include Hawthorn for sure. This is a pretty special plant not to include. Tree, very much part of the Wheel of the Year. Yeah, for the Celtic tradition, for pagan tradition, for yeah, Wheel of the Year and so forth. Courage is on my Soulflower. And I'm just going to read you this message because I don't think I've read you any of her messages. Hawthorn medicine for the heart on all levels, helping you find the courage to face and overcome your fears, facilitating self-love and self-acceptance. Hawthorn supports a strong and protected, open-hearted state, allowing you to fully give and receive love so that you can truly come into your own divine strength and power. Kind of regardless of what is in the message of all of these decks, there's a real sense of reverence with this plant. And I think all of the creators kind of get that message through. In the Spirit of Nature Oracle, as I said, the trees are all really well established, and it does focus more on the energy of the tree than actual the gift of the tree. The medicine of the tree, and we do see the image of the Green Man within every single tree. The message from Green Man is, challenge opens the way before. So subtle, different messages from each of these decks, but I hope this gives you an idea of the different flavor of these decks. And if you don't have any plant-based decks in your collection, that you really follow your heart and ask yourself, you know, why would you want to bring a plant-based deck into your collection, and how would you use it? And is it, you know, are you going to be Herbcrafting? Are you going to be creating your own tinctures, your own essential oils? Is it just for fun and for finding a good pairing with other decks? I mean, there's lots of different reasons why you would want to add a couple of plant-based decks to your collection. All right, so these are the rest of the cards that I've pulled for this video, but it's way too many. So I just want you to know that I love these decks, and each in their own way, they have a different kind of energy and medicine, and that a couple of them I'm going to actually pull out and use on my altar over the summer because I really feel that connection, and maybe even take some of them on my walks. I do have a plant app on my phone, which I've been using, and it's super accurate. If you're interested, let me know in the comments below and I'll tell you which app I'm using, but it's been really helpful. So yeah, so I saw Yarrow was here. Let's do Yarrow for sure. And then I've got Mugwort down here. We're going to do that one. So 2 more cards. This plant here is a really good example of how you could use the cards for plant identification, because you can really see the leaves very, very clearly, and also the flowers, you know, right? So you definitely could carry these with you if you were doing that. On the, sorry, I'm getting the Druid plant. Again, you've got really clear leaves and so forth. So that's another example, as well as Ciolos. And on Ciolos, you've got more of a, you've got yellow flowers. And here it looks like the flowers are more pink. So this is going to vary from place to place. And then I just wanted to point out on this Nicole's Maiden Oracle. And if you don't know what you're looking at and you go to the High Priestess page, it talks about mugwort, but we've also got a flower here as well too. So the mugwort is actually this plant here, right? So we can see the little tiny flowers and the same shape of leaves, which confirms we're talking about the same plant. But for me, doing a little bit of work in studying the Latin names has been really helpful. So mugwort is also known as wormwood, which is the name that Siola uses, and it's also just referred to as Artemisia. And I will just give you a quick shot here. So focus, release, caution, prophecy, clairvoyance, protection, and integration. So a lot of really big words here. So I'm going to definitely take some time. This is not a plant that I'm familiar with on the, but obviously a pretty important plant because all 5 of these decks include this. And this is the High Priestess card on this deck, and it's the High Priestess card on this deck. So I would definitely, I'm going to look into that and do a little bit more research and studying of mugwort and see how I can bring that into my own wildcrafting. Okay, and then yarrow, super easy to find. I know in North America, everywhere that I've been, from the east to the west coast, dry areas, coastal areas, it's really easy to find this plant. And just making simple teas, if you've never done any wildcrafting, herbcrafting, this is a really simple plant to start with. And even just collecting it and drying it, and then you can have it all winter long. And I know one of my teachers has it on her altar all the time, so there's definitely a spiritual aspect to this plant as well too. And in my handy dandy spreadsheet, we have, so in the Maiden Oracle, it's the Chariot card, which is really interesting. Fidelity, masculinity, and virility is Druid craft. So this is Druid craft here. And so we have this standing stone here, kind of emphasizing the nature of the masculinity and the virility. In Soulflower, it's called Boundaries. And in the Herbcrafter's Tarot, it is the Ace of Air, so the Ace of Swords. Look what we have here. So again, we've got this kind of, and even just looking at the plant, it's a very light and airy plant. It can grow really, really tall. And yeah. So thank you for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed this and this has given you some kind of inspiration to either have another look at your plant-based oracle and tarot decks, or to maybe perhaps add one to your collection, because it is so much fun to kind of work with the plants and be more in touch with the so-called weeds that are all around us. As always, I look forward to reading your comments. Stay well, my friends. Namaste.